In the twilight of early autumn, the royal family seemed to stand on steady ground, but underneath the polished marble floors of Buckingham Palace, cracks were forming. It all started with what appeared to be an innocent act of kindness, King Charles visiting a nursing home to meet one of Britain's oldest living citizens. On paper, it was routine. In practice, it became the spark that lit a fire no one could control. Charles had always been sensitive to the weight of his role, especially after taking the throne later in life. He wasn't born with Diana's effortless charm or the modern appeal of William and Kate. But what he did possess was a quiet ability to connect with people on a personal level, something that surprised even his critics. At Lightwater Nursing Home in Surrey, that gift shone brighter than ever. Cameras captured him kneeling beside Ethel Ketterum, a 116-year-old woman who had lived through 6 monarchs, 2 world wars, and the sweeping transformations of the 20th century. Her frail hand clasped his, her voice quivering with both age and admiration as she declared that every girl of her generation once dreamed of marrying him. The comment might have been brushed aside as sweet nostalgia, but in that small sitting room filled with nurses, family members, and reporters, it landed like a thunderclap. Journalists pounced on the line, and by the next morning, headlines proclaimed Charles as the King of Hearts, the people's monarch, and the light of the royal family. Photos of his warm smile and the elderly woman's delighted expression flooded social media. Hashtags praising him climbed to the top of trending lists. For a moment, the monarchy appeared reborn, not through grandeur but through humanity. Yet while the public celebrated, another story was brewing inside the palace walls. Queen Camilla sat alone in her private room, scrolling through the endless praise. Not one article mentioned her. Not one commentator applauded her presence or her role in the monarchy. Every word of adoration was reserved for Charles. She tossed aside her tablet, pacing by the window with clenched fists. For years, she had endured being compared to Diana, labeled the interloper, the other woman. Now, even in Diana's absence, she found herself overshadowed again, this time by her own husband. The jealousy wasn't immediate rage, it was a slow, burning fire that had been simmering for decades. She remembered the endless headlines when Diana was alive, the public's refusal to accept her even after marriage, the whispers of disapproval at official functions. The nursing home visit reopened all those wounds. To the world, Charles was the compassionate king. To her, he was a man who could never stop reminding her that she would always be second best. When Charles returned to the palace, buoyant from the glowing coverage, he expected warmth. Instead, he found Camilla waiting with eyes sharp as blades. Her words weren't gentle questions but accusations. Why did he need to charm the nation? Why did he make her invisible with every public smile? Charles, tired but patient, tried to explain that it wasn't intentional, that it was just a kind moment with an old woman. But Camilla didn't want explanations, she wanted validation. The conversation spiraled, a crystal vase shattering against the floor marking the peak of her fury. Behind closed doors, Charles retreated to his study, where he stared at an old photo of Diana. For him, it was a moment of private reflection, a reminder of past mistakes and enduring memories. For Camilla, spying from the doorway, it was the ultimate betrayal. Even in death, Diana lingered. Even now, Charles seemed to seek comfort in her image. The jealousy that had been simmering erupted into something reckless. That night, driven by wounded pride and a desperate need to reclaim her place, Camilla disguised herself in a coat and scarf and slipped away from the palace. Her destination wasn't a gala or a secret meeting, it was Lightwater Nursing Home. In her mind, the frail woman who praised Charles wasn't just an admirer. She was the enemy who had reopened old scars and cast Camilla deeper into the shadows. When she knocked on Ethel's door, her voice was cold, her words laced with accusation. Why had the old woman praised Charles so openly? Did she intend to humiliate the queen? To drag the past back into the present? Ethel, bewildered, tried to explain that she had only spoken the truth as she saw it. But Camilla's fury wouldn't listen. Her voice rose, sharp and unforgiving, until the elderly woman's breath faltered and her frail body gave way under the pressure of the confrontation. In the chaos that followed, family rushing in, nurses screaming, an ambulance siren cutting through the night, Camilla realized too late what she had done. The damage was irreversible. News of the incident spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the warm story of the king's compassion was eclipsed by headlines about the queen's cruelty. Social media branded her the wicked queen. Lawsuits were filed by Ethel's family, and the monarchy was thrown into crisis. The scandal was unprecedented. Never before had a senior royal faced such direct public outrage and legal consequences. And at the heart of it all wasn't politics, duty, or ceremony, it was jealousy, raw and unrestrained, exposing the fragile underbelly of the monarchy to the world. The morning papers screamed with bold headlines that seemed almost unbelievable. Queen sends elderly woman to hospital, the wicked Queen of England, and public fury at Camilla's jealous rage blazed across front pages from London to Edinburgh. Television anchors delivered the story with grim faces, commentators debated her fitness as queen, and ordinary citizens filled radio call-ins with a level of anger rarely aimed at royalty. It was no longer gossip. It was a full-scale crisis. Inside Buckingham Palace, the air was suffocating. Advisors shuffled nervously through corridors, speaking in hushed tones. Senior staff who once prided themselves on discretion could barely contain their unease. The monarchy had survived divorces, affairs, and scandals, but never had a queen herself been accused of publicly humiliating a national treasure. At the center of the storm sat Charles. His head bowed in silence as his advisors laid out the grim reality. Edward Langley, one of the most trusted aides, spoke plainly. Your Majesty, Mrs. Caderham's children have already taken legal action. They are suing the Queen personally, not the institution. They want damages, an apology, and they refuse to accept taxpayer funds being used to cover it. The public agrees with them. The words cut deep. For Charles, the role of monarch had always meant putting the crown above the individual. But here was his wife, facing a lawsuit as if she were any other citizen. Camilla sat across the table, her jaw tight, trying to maintain composure. It was a misunderstanding, she insisted. I never touched her. I only spoke. Her voice cracked as she added, they dared to sue me, the Queen? Edward did not flinch. Witnesses saw you, nurses heard the shouting. The family says your words caused severe shock, leading to her collapse. Doctors have confirmed it. The evidence will not disappear. Charles exhaled heavily, closing his eyes. The monarchy's survival depended on trust, and this incident had poisoned it. He turned to Camilla, his voice steady but firm. You must take responsibility. The palace will not shield you with public money. You will cover the medical bills yourself. You will face this head on. Camilla's eyes widened in disbelief. You would abandon me? She whispered. After everything I have endured for you, Charles? After all the years of being despised, you now let the nation crucify me? But Charles was resolute. The monarchy cannot afford another cover-up. You are not above the people. If you refuse to act, the institution itself will suffer. His tone carried an authority that startled even his advisors. The meeting ended without further debate. The decision was final. The cost of Ethel's care was staggering. Tens of thousands of pounds for intensive treatment and monitoring. For a monarch, it might have been manageable, but Camilla's personal fortune was not bottomless. Much of her wealth came from royal allowances, not private income. She began scrambling in desperation, reaching out to contacts, exploring any possible way to raise money quickly. In secrecy, she took on commercial work under a pseudonym. A furniture company photographed her hand resting on a polished oak table. A jam manufacturer hired her for a promotional shoot, smiling awkwardly as she held jars of marmalade. The checks came in, enough to chip away at the hospital bills, but her efforts were soon exposed. Reporters discovered that Clara Morton, the woman in those ads, was none other than Queen Camilla herself. The revelation detonated across the media. From palaces to photo shoots, read one mocking headline, "The Marmalade Queen," joked another, with side-by-side images of Camilla at royal events and in cheap promotional spreads. Hashtags ridiculing her trended for days, and television comedians seized the material with glee. For Camilla, each headline was another dagger. She had tried to quietly solve the problem, but instead she had plunged even deeper into humiliation. The public, far from sympathizing, turned her into a laughingstock. Online petitions circulated calling for her removal from the monarchy. Some demanded Parliament strip her of her title altogether. Alone in her private chambers, she scrolled through the comments until her hands shook. Monster, fraud, unworthy queen, the words blurred before her eyes. She whispered to herself through clenched teeth, "They don't understand. No one understands. I just wanted to be seen." In that moment, she was no longer simply angry with Ethel's family or the British public. A deeper bitterness had taken root, directed at Charles himself. He had refused to shield her. He had chosen the crown over her pride, and in her mind, that betrayal cut far deeper than the headlines ever could. As the nation rallied around Ethel, celebrating her resilience as she slowly recovered in hospital, Camilla's image collapsed under the weight of scandal and ridicule. She had paid the bills, but the debt to her pride was far greater. And though the palace tried to move forward, the queen herself was left haunted by the knowledge that England no longer saw her as a royal figure. They saw her only as a joke wrapped in silk. Crowds gathered outside St. Hospital as television crews jostled for position. Union Jack flags waved in the breeze, and a chant of "We love you, Ethel" rose through the air. Camera lights flared as the doors slid open and nurses wheeled out the fragile but smiling woman who had become a symbol of resilience for an entire nation. At 116 years old, she looked impossibly small in her chair, but the sparkle in her eyes silenced the noise of London traffic. And her son George and daughter Clara walked proudly at her side, their hands raised in gratitude to the cheering public. Broadcasters captured every second of her release, replaying it across channels with triumphant headlines. England's living treasure returns home. Ethel, the flame that never fades. For millions, the sight of her smile was proof that dignity and kindness still mattered in a world that too often seemed consumed by cruelty. Reporters described her survival as a miracle, but in truth, it was her spirit that had turned her into something greater than a patient. She was now a national icon. At home, families gathered to watch, wiping tears as they saw her thank the nation in a frail but steady voice. "I am only an old woman," she said, "but I hope my story brings light to England." Those simple words carved themselves into history. Shared across social media with hashtags celebrating her resilience, she became the voice of endurance, a reminder that respect is earned through compassion, not demanded through power. Meanwhile, in the halls of Buckingham Palace, silence weighed heavier than marble. Camilla sat alone in her sitting room, the television glow painting her face pale. She watched the coverage in silence, her fists curling as the crowd's cheers reached her ears. She had once dreamed of that kind of affection, of finally being embraced as a true queen. Now the same people who celebrated Ethel mocked her mercilessly. Every headline, every joke about marmalade or furniture ads stripped away another layer of her dignity. Charles, buried in his study, avoided confrontation. His advisors insisted he maintain focus on repairing the monarchy's image, scheduling appearances that highlighted his steadiness and compassion. He spoke softly at public events, his every gesture carefully measured to distance himself from the scandal that engulfed his wife. Privately, he felt the weight of failure. His marriage had been a compromise, his rule already fragile. Now he was torn between loyalty to his queen and duty to his people. Camilla's anger, however, was no longer quiet resentment. It hardened into something unshakable. In her eyes, Charles had abandoned her when she needed him most. He had allowed the public to destroy her reputation, forced her to bear humiliation alone, and then stood by silently as Ethel was lifted onto a pedestal she could never reach. Night after night, she whispered to herself in the darkened halls, "Always her, always them, never me." The bitterness consumed her, shaping every thought and gesture. Outside the palace, the public's fury refused to fade. Petitions demanding Camilla's resignation surged past 1 million signatures. Editorials in once sympathetic newspapers questioned her place beside the king. Some voices in parliament began to murmur that the monarchy could not survive if the queen herself was despised. For the first time in generations, the crown trembled under the weight of one woman's jealousy. Ethel's story, meanwhile, took on a life of its own. School children wrote essays about her, artists painted her portrait, a biography was rushed into publication titled The Century's Witness, which sold out within days. She had become the embodiment of history's endurance, a living link between past and present. And every new honor for Ethel cast Camilla further into shadow. On a quiet evening, as the palace gardens glowed in twilight, Camilla pressed her hands against the glass of her window. She whispered into the emptiness, "Why do they love her and not me? I am queen." The words dissolved into silence, unheard and unanswered. The crowd's cheers outside the hospital echoed faintly through the city, carrying with them a truth she could no longer escape. England had chosen its Queen of Hearts, and it was not her. The monarchy endured, but its image bore a scar. Power had not been enough to command respect, and titles could not purchase love. In the end, it was a 116-year-old woman with trembling hands who had reminded a kingdom that kindness, not envy, was the crown that truly mattered.